Earlier today on the Pat McAfee show, Ian Rappaport suggested that Odell Beckham Jr.'s first ACL repair didn't go very well, and everybody was actually relieved when he tore his ACL a second time. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and in this video, we're gonna take a look at these really fascinating comments by Ian Rappaport about Odell Beckham Jr.'s ACL. Wherever these reports he's getting are coming from, they're basically throwing his initial surgeon under the bus, saying that Odell Beckham Jr. had a bad surgical outcome, and now things are fixed and better because of the second surgery. Let's take a listen here and talk about these comments.
There is mutual interest, and they know more about his knee than everyone else. Their team doctor did the surgery. Sounds like it went really well. And actually,
we haven't gotten specific confirmation of which surgeon did the operation, but Dr. Nia Elitrash is the LA Rams head team physician. He's a surgeon, so presumably he's who I would suspect did this surgery for Odell Beckham Jr.
Corrected a previously bad surgery from a couple years ago.
Oh, who was that doctor?
Cleveland.
Have we talked?
Okay, so first of all, Pat's question of who was that doctor really needs to be addressed first of all. That doctor is Dr. James Andrews, who by all accounts is one of the preeminent orthopedic sports medicine surgeons in history. He's operated on tons of high-profile professional athletes, which doesn't necessarily guarantee that nobody's going to make mistakes, but I wish Rappaport would have pointed this out or Pat would have known this, because it almost implies that Odell's first surgeon was just some kind of two-bit random hack who maybe didn't know what they were doing, when in reality, it was one of the most respected sports medicine orthopedic surgeons in history. So Dr. James Andrews, the Browns released it themselves, is who did that first surgery. And what this report is implying is that that first surgery didn't go as planned. Essentially, it was a bad surgery that Odell was left with.
No, I'm just learning of this right now. And we don't have to out the doctor, but these are the things that we should be outing, though, for future players, because all these relationships that some people have, they automatically get business. And what if they're not great?
Again, Dr. James Andrews, tons of respect here. I'm sure, number one, he's not worried about getting business because of all the respect that he has in the field. And so I wish that part was at least acknowledged, because Dr. Andrews deserves his due respect. Again, not saying people are perfect and there's no room to make mistakes, but this isn't some random surgeon who operated on him.
They just are there strictly because of who they know.
Yeah.
You know, that's a real thing.
So when Odell tore his ACL with the Rams, remember on I was thinking interception return, right? Or with the Browns on interception return. Yeah. He had an ACL done. It did not sound like it went as well as anyone would have hoped. So,
first of all, according to who? According to Odell, according to the Rams and the Rams team physician, this is a big subjective statement to make, because there's a lot of different ways you can classify the success of a surgery. Initially, the surgeon might finish suturing and closing up the skin and say, yep, we got a good anchor in there. The reconstruction looked like it went really well. It was nice and tight. It was in the right location. This was a successful surgery, right? We hear all the time after somebody has a surgery, we get this report that says it went well. They're expected to make a full recovery. So now we're hearing that it didn't go as well as everybody would have hoped. And that's where there's a lot more subjectivity and questions that come into play beyond just what that surgeon did when they were there inside the knee.
So before the Rams signed Odell Beckham this past season when it was like a huge deal, the knee was a concern because it was not 100% healthy. And
Here, what does not 100% healthy mean? There's so much time that's transpired between the initial surgical reconstruction and the subsequent rehab to whenever that MRI might have been done, that it's hard to say 100% certainty what was actually a result of the first surgery that maybe wasn't treated as it should have been versus what might be new injury, what might be just the natural progression of change in the knee. Now, certainly if you see on the MRI that the ACL graft looks like it's failed, then that's one question. But then I would wonder why the Rams decided to take that risk if they saw on the MRI that somebody essentially had a failed or a bad ACL reconstruction.
I believe they would have given him a long-term deal just based on the knee because it was troubling. And then in the Super Bowl, he's playing his butt off. He's probably going to be the Super Bowl MVP. He tears his ACL again, and in a weird way, there's a little bit of relief from everyone because now it can get fixed right. This past surgery went really well, and he probably is going to have extended his career just because of this recent surgery.
So this is the crux of the whole discussion. Ian's reporting here implies that the Rams knew, and Odell Beckham knew, that he had a poorly functioning, less than optimal knee, whether it was injury or damage to the ACL reconstruction or something else going on. They signed him knowingly with something that they didn't feel was optimal, and then put him out there to play with something that they didn't feel was optimal. Now, if Odell was fully aware of the risks of having another ACL rupture and he made that decision, then okay, that's one thing. But it's really wild to think of the team being relieved that a player tore their ACL because now they can go in and fix it. If it's truly something that bad that you're relieved when it tears, you really should address it ahead of time. You don't want it to just advance and progress, because then when you tear it the second time, you might have a new bad injury. You might have a big new meniscus tear that's really hard to repair. You might have a big cartilage injury. And so you should never hope that your athlete goes out and re-injures their knee so that you can go in and fix somebody else's surgery. The motive behind all this reporting sounds really suspect. This doesn't sound like something that the medical team would be putting out there. Also, when Ian says that they expect this is going to extend his career well beyond what it otherwise would be, that's extremely presumptive. First of all, he's only a couple of months or so out from his most recent ACL surgery, and I would argue that you can't really define if the surgery has been a true success until somebody gets back to playing, to running, and gets back out there on the field. There are so many subsequent things that have to happen in his recovery before we could say this was in fact a true success. So to right away say, oh man, he's going to extend his career further beyond it ever would have been, is really presumptive about what's to come. The other crucial thing to understand here is whenever you have an ACL reconstruction, yes, the surgeon does the initial surgery, but then what happens in the subsequent months with either the surgeon's physical therapy and medical rehab staff or the player's own personal rehabilitation staff is arguably just as important with getting them back out there on the field. It's having the appropriate rehab, the appropriate sequence of loading so that number one, you protect that graft, you protect the reconstruction and allow it to integrate fully. And then number two, you progress the body and the loading back up in a protected manner. If you do an amazing surgery, but then you have terrible rehab and physical therapy, it doesn't matter what that surgeon did, that poor rehabilitation and oversight is going to lead to a bad outcome. And so to put all this on the surgeon and imply that Odell Beckham went to some hack surgeon that needs to be outed so that other players don't go there really sells this whole sequence short of the complexity of what it truly is.
Who said that? The doctor that did the surgery went in there and said, you know what, actually, this thing was kind of not even fixed. I fixed it all up for you. You're welcome.
No, they knew. It's funny. They knew before they knew going in, because they, to sign him, you have to do an MRI and everything, and they were troubled. So they knew that it was probably just a matter of time.
Again, that's just wild to me to think, okay, we see this knee, it's only a matter of time before the ACL tears again, but we're going to take that risk and we're going to put the individual out there knowing that there's that risk of other injuries. Because you have to remember, when you tear your ACL, it's not that it's only the ACL that tears. There's all kinds of other secondary injuries that can occur that arguably make it more detrimental long-term in someone's health. And so you should never hope that somebody re-injures their knee so that you can go in and fix somebody else's work. If it's truly unsafe, if it's truly not good, it should be addressed before somebody is put back out there and exposed to that risk. So I hope we get some more clarification about this, because this reporting feels like it really oversimplifies, number one, the complexity of ACL surgery and ACL surgery rehabilitation, but then number two, the risk of putting an athlete out there to play when you're almost hoping that they get injured so that you can go and fix someone else's surgical work. Even the best surgeons in the world are not perfect, and so it's always possible that mistakes can be made. But if you understand what those mistakes are, but then you take on that risk, you can't really go back in hindsight and blame the person who made those first mistakes, because you accepted that risk and accepted that responsibility of what that knee looked like when you made the decision to put the athlete back out there on the field. Usually these surgeons have their initial rehab protocol that they outline, but then oftentimes the players go out and have their own personal athletic training or physical therapy staff that kind of guide them through the rehab. And so once the player leaves the surgeon's operating room, it's in a way out of their hand with how well that reconstruction is going to perform. There are tons of other parties involved here, including the athlete themselves. And so it's important that we think about that complexity before just throwing blame on one individual whenever we hear these types of stories. That's it for the video, everybody. Let me know as always any questions or comments down below. And until next time, we'll see you later. Bye.